On the night of August 13th, 1961, Klaus Dieter Hartmann stood at the window of his fifth-floor apartment in Prenzlauer Berg, watching construction crews string barbed wire across Bernauer Straße. He was 24 years old. He had a wife sleeping in the next room. And in that moment, watching soldiers unroll concrete posts in the darkness, he understood that his world had just been cut in half. The wire glinted under sodium streetlights like surgical thread closing a wound. Klaus pressed his forehead against the cold glass. Below, an old woman tried to cross the street toward the western sector. A Volkspolizei officer grabbed her arm. She dropped her bag. Apples rolled across the cobblestones into the gutter. Klaus did not know it yet, but he was watching the birth of a scar that would split a city, a nation, and eventually his own family for 28 years. He did not know that within 3 years he would risk everything to cross that scar. And he certainly could not imagine that 15 years later he would do it again, not for himself, but for a daughter who did not yet exist. The Berlin Wall was not built in a day. It was built in a single night of barbed wire that would harden into concrete. Watchtowers, dogs, mines, and the cold bureaucracy of a state that had learned to perfect the architecture of imprisonment. But this story is not about the wall. It is about a man who crossed it twice. And the second time, the world was watching. The year 1961 felt like the edge of a cliff. The world had survived one apocalypse in 1945 only to teeter toward another. In the 16 years since Nazi Germany's collapse, the victors had become enemies. Berlin, once Hitler's capital, now a defeated city occupied by 4 powers, had become the most dangerous place on earth. By 1961, more than 3 million East Germans had fled to the west through Berlin, bleeding the German Democratic Republic of doctors, engineers, teachers, and skilled workers. Walter Ulbricht, the General Secretary of the Socialist Unity Party, had a problem. His country was hemorrhaging its future. The solution, approved by Moscow, was brutal and simple. Seal the city. Turn East Berlin into a cage. The operation began at midnight. Soviet advisors coordinated. East German soldiers received sealed orders at 23 o'clock hours. By 1 o'clock, barbed wire cut through 27 miles of city streets. Families woke to find themselves separated from parents, children. Lovers who lived 3 blocks away on the wrong side of a line that had not existed when they went to sleep. Klaus Hartmann worked as a draftsman at VEB Elektrokohle, a state-owned factory producing carbon electrodes. His hands were always stained with graphite dust. He lived in a 2-room apartment with Anna, his wife of 14 months, in a gray building that smelled of cabbage and coal smoke. Their life was neither good nor bad. It simply was. He had grown up in East Berlin, watched Soviet tanks roll through in 1945, learned to navigate the new rules. You did not ask questions. You did not complain about shortages. You attended the mandatory party meetings and nodded at the right moments. You learned that freedom was an abstract concept and survival was the only practical philosophy. Anna worked as a seamstress in a textile collective. She had soft hands despite years of needlework, and she hummed while she cooked their modest dinners, usually potatoes, cabbage, and if they were lucky, a piece of pork on Sundays. She never spoke about politics. She never spoke about the West. She had learned, as everyone had, that some thoughts were safer left unspoken. But Klaus had a secret, a small one, dangerous only in accumulation. He listened to Ria's radio in the American sector, late at night when Anna was asleep. He kept the volume low, the radio hidden in a drawer beneath winter sweaters. He listened to news from West Berlin, from America, from a world that existed 15 minutes away by U-Bahn, but might as well have been on another planet. He listened because he needed to know that something else existed. That the world was larger than party slogans and production quotas. That somewhere, people chose their own governments, read uncensored newspapers, traveled without permission slips. He never told Anna. He never told anyone. because in the German Democratic Republic, even your wife might be required to report you, not out of malice, but out of fear. Everyone feared someone. And the Ministerium für Staatssicherheit, the Stasi, had perfected the weaponization of that fear. The night the wall went up, Klaus could not sleep. He stood at the window until dawn, watching workers transform wire into barrier. By morning, the barbed wire had multiplied. By afternoon, wooden fences appeared. By the end of the week, concrete posts were being sunk into the ground. Anna came to stand beside him. She said nothing. She placed her hand on his arm, and they watched together as their city was divided into captor and captive. "We're still here," she said quietly. "We're together." Klaus nodded, but something had changed in him during that long night. A decision he had not yet made was already forming, silent and inevitable, as ice crystallizing on a window pane. The wall rose quickly. Within months, the barbed wire became concrete barriers 8 feet tall. Watchtowers appeared every few hundred meters, manned by soldiers with binoculars and automatic rifles. The death strip, Todestrophon, emerged between inner and outer walls. A stretch of sand raked smooth every morning so footprints would show, studded with tank traps, floodlights, and tripwires connected to alarms. The official name was Anti-Fascist Protection Rampart. The official explanation was that it protected East German citizens from Western aggression and sabotage. The official penalty for attempting to cross was death, though the government preferred the phrase use of firearms in border defense. In the first year, 55 people tried to escape through, over, or under the wall. 32 succeeded. 23 were shot. The numbers were not published, but everyone knew them anyway. News traveled through whispers, through Western radio, through the particular silence that followed gunfire in the night. Klaus returned to his routine. He went to work, he came home, he ate dinner with Anna, he attended party meetings and raised his hand when others raised theirs. He lived the performance of normalcy that everyone in East Berlin had mastered. But the radio stayed hidden in the drawer, and late at night he listened. He learned about tunnel escapes, about families separated, about Checkpoint Charlie, where diplomats and the occasional refugee passed under the gaze of soldiers from 2 different worlds. He learned that the West had not forgotten the East, even if the East was being trained to forget the West. And slowly, carefully, Klaus began to plan. Not immediately, not recklessly. He was a draftsman. He understood blueprints, measurements, tolerances. He understood that escape was not about courage. It was about precision. He began to study the wall during his lunch breaks. There were sections near Treptow where the barriers seemed less fortified. There were sewers that ran beneath border zones, though most were now graded or filled with concrete. There were gaps in patrol schedules, moments when guards changed shifts or looked away. He memorized routes. He noted patterns. He said nothing to Anna because he loved her too much to make her complicit. If he succeeded, he would bring her later. If he failed, she could claim ignorance. It took him 11 months to finalize his plan. 11 months of observation, preparation, and the slow erosion of fear by necessity. By July 1963, Klaus Hartmann had decided that he would rather die trying to be free than live safely in a cage. The escape route he chose was simple. Desperate, but simple. There was a section of the wall near the Spree River where the concrete had not yet been reinforced with the newer, taller segments. The death strip was narrow there, only 15 meters wide. If he could climb the first wall, cross the strip, and scale the second wall before the guards in the nearest watchtower reacted, he might make it. The chances were poor, perhaps 1 in 3, perhaps worse. But Klaus had done the math. If he stayed, he would live 40 more years in East Berlin. 40 years of censored newspapers and ration cards and listening to illegal radio in the dark. 40 years of pretending to believe in a system that believed in nothing but its own perpetuation. 1 in 3 seemed like acceptable odds. He chose a night in August, 2 years to the day after the wall went up. There was a kind of poetry in that, though Klaus was not a poetic man. He left Anna sleeping. He kissed her forehead, and she stirred but did not wake. He took nothing with him except a small bag with a change of clothes, his identification papers, and a photograph of Anna tucked into his shirt pocket. The walk to the wall took 40 minutes. The streets were empty. A few Volkspolizei patrols passed, but Klaus kept his head down, walked with purpose. A man going to night shift at a factory. A man with permission to be outside after curfew. He reached the sector near Treptow just after 2 a.m. The watchtower was 200 meters to the north. Another one 300 meters south. The gap between their searchlight sweeps created a window of perhaps 90 seconds. Klaus crouched behind an abandoned warehouse and watched. The light swept. Once. Twice. He counted the intervals. 75 seconds. 80. 92. Not consistent. But close enough. His heart hammered against his ribs. His hands shook. He forced himself to breathe slowly, deliberately. Fear was acceptable. Panic was fatal. The light swept north. Klaus ran. The first wall was 8 feet of concrete, smooth and cold. He had brought a rope with a grappling hook fashioned from bent rebar. He threw it. Missed. The metal clanged against concrete. He threw again. It caught. He climbed. His arms burned. His fingers scraped against rough concrete. He pulled himself up, over, dropped into the death strip. The sand was soft. His feet sank. He ran toward the second wall, 20 meters away that felt like 20 kilometers. Behind him a shout. German words cutting through the night. Halt. Stehen bleiben. Searchlights swung toward him. The world turned white and shadowless. Klaus did not stop. He reached the second wall, threw the hook, missed again, threw again, caught it, began to climb. The first bullet hit the concrete 6 inches from his head. Chips of stone stung his face. The second bullet went wide. The third, Klaus never knew where the third bullet went. He was over the wall, falling, hitting the ground on the western side hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. He lay in the dirt behind a metal barrier, gasping, waiting for another shot that never came. On the eastern side, soldiers shouted, but they did not cross. The border was absolute, even for pursuit. Klaus stood slowly. His legs shook. His hands were bleeding. West Berlin rose around him. Streetlights, neon signs, the distant sound of traffic. A world in color after years of gray. He had made it. 1 in 3. He had won the lottery of survival. An American patrol found him 20 minutes later. They gave him water, a blanket, and a cigarette that he did not smoke because his hands trembled too much to hold it steady. They took him to a refugee processing center in Marienfeld, where officials asked questions in careful German and wrote his answers in neat files that would eventually be archived and forgotten. Klaus told them his name, his occupation, his address in East Berlin. And when they asked if he had family in the East, he hesitated only a moment before saying yes. A wife. Anna. He would bring her later. He would find a way. The officials nodded and wrote it down. They had heard this promise before. They knew how rarely it came true. Klaus Hartmann was processed, documented, and released into West Berlin with a temporary residency permit and a voucher for food and housing assistance. The system for handling refugees from the East was well established by 1963. He was one of thousands. His story was not unique. He found work quickly. West Berlin was rebuilding, booming, hungry for labor. Within 2 months, Klaus was working as a technical draftsman for a construction company near Charlottenburg. The pay was 3 times what he had earned in the East. He could buy meat every day if he wanted. He could read any newspaper. He could walk any street without permission. He should have been happy. He had escaped. But every night he thought of Anna waking to find him gone. He imagined Stasi officers knocking on her door, asking questions she could not answer. He imagined her fear, her confusion, her sense of betrayal. He tried to send letters through the Red Cross. They were returned unopened. He tried to call. The lines were disconnected. He tried to arrange a family reunification through official channels. The East German government rejected every application. Anna Hartmann was classified as the wife of a traitor and class enemy. She would not be permitted to leave the German Democratic Republic. The wall did not just divide cities. It divided families, loves, promises. Klaus had crossed it, but in doing so, he had abandoned the person he had crossed it for. He lived with that guilt for months, then years. He worked. He rented a small apartment in Kreuzberg. He learned to navigate freedom without joy. And then, in the spring of 1966, he received a letter. It came through a circuitous route, mailed to a West German charity organization that forwarded it to his address. The envelope had been opened and resealed multiple times. The censors had read every word. The letter was from Anna. 2 paragraphs written in her careful handwriting. "Klaus, I do not know if this will reach you. They tell me you are a traitor. They ask me questions I cannot answer. But I need you to know something. We have a daughter. She was born February 14th, 1965. Her name is Lena. She has your eyes. She will never know her father. I hope you are safe. I hope you are free. I hope that was worth it." Klaus read the letter 17 times. He memorized every word. He stared at the date, February 14th, 1965, and did the math backward. Anna had been pregnant when he escaped. She had not known. He had not known. He had a daughter. A child growing up on the other side of a wall he had vowed never to cross again. A child who would be raised to believe her father was a criminal, a deserter, an enemy of the state. Klaus folded the letter carefully and placed it in his wallet, where it would remain for the next 12 years. Softening at the creases, the ink fading but the words indelible. He did not reply. There was no safe way to reply. But he made a new promise, silent and absolute. Someday he would bring Lena to the West. Someday she would know that her father had not abandoned her. He had simply been waiting for the right moment. He did not know it would take 12 years. He did not know it would require crossing the wall a second time. He did not know the second escape would become Cold War legend. The years passed slowly. Klaus worked, saved money, and applied repeatedly for family reunification. Every application was denied. The East German government's position was clear. Klaus Hartmann was a fugitive. His family would not be rewarded for his crime. But Klaus was patient. He had learned patience in the death strip, in that 90-second window between searchlight sweeps. Patience was the only weapon available to the powerless. He followed his daughter's life from a distance. Fragments of information arrived through underground networks, through refugees, through West German intelligence contacts who occasionally took pity on desperate fathers. He learned that Lena attended school in Prenzlauer Berg, that she was healthy, that Anna had not remarried, that the Stasi monitored them both, waiting for Klaus to make contact. He learned that his daughter was learning to live in the same cage he had escaped. And slowly Klaus began to plan again. Not another solo escape. That would leave Lena and Anna behind permanently. No, he needed something more complex. Something that would allow him to enter East Berlin, retrieve them, and return to the West. It was an impossible plan. It was suicidal. The wall had grown more sophisticated every year. By the mid-1970s, it was not a wall but a multi-layered system of barriers, sensors, guards, and dogs. The death strip had been widened, mined, and illuminated. Escape attempts had dropped to a handful per year. Success was measured in single digits. But Klaus was not interested in statistics. He was interested in his daughter. In 1976, he made contact with a network of escape helpers, Flughelfer, who specialized in extracting people from the East. These were not governments or organizations. They were individuals, often former refugees themselves, who had decided that the wall was not a political boundary, but a moral obscenity. They operated in the shadows. They built tunnels, forged documents, bribed guards. They charged money, sometimes a little, sometimes a fortune, but they also accepted cases for ideological reasons. A father trying to reach his daughter was exactly the kind of case they accepted. Klaus met with a man named Rolf in a bar near Kreuzberg. Rolf was in his 40s, compact and careful, with the quiet intensity of someone who had seen too much and survived by noticing details. "Your situation is difficult," Rolf said. "Not impossible, but difficult." They discussed options. Tunnels took months to dig and were frequently discovered. False documents could get Klaus into East Berlin but would not get 3 people out. Bribing border guards was expensive and unreliable. "There is another way," Rolf said finally. "Dangerous. But it has worked before," he explained. Klaus would enter East Berlin legally, using a tourist visa. Such visas were difficult to obtain but not impossible, especially for family visits. Once inside, he would locate his wife and daughter. They would not attempt to cross through checkpoints or barriers. Instead, they would go under. "Under?" Klaus asked. "The sewers," Rolf said. "There are still passages beneath the wall that have not been completely sealed. We have maps. Old maps from before the war. If you can get to the right access point, if you can navigate the system, if you can time it correctly, you can come out on the western side. And if we're caught," Rolf met his eyes, "then you will spend the rest of your life in prison, and your family will be punished for your attempt." Klaus nodded slowly. 1 in 3. Maybe worse. But those were the only odds he had ever been offered. "How much?" he asked. "For a family of 3? 50,000 Deutschmarks." Klaus had 30,000 saved. He sold everything he owned. He borrowed from friends, from banks, from anyone who would lend. Within 4 months, he had the money. The plan would be executed in the spring of 1978. Klaus would enter East Berlin on April 15th. He would make contact with Anna and Lena, and on the night of April 22nd, they would descend into the sewers beneath the wall and crawl toward freedom. Klaus spent weeks memorizing maps, routes, contingency plans. He studied the sewer system until he could navigate it blind. He learned the guard rotation at every checkpoint within 2 kilometers of their planned exit point. He was 41 years old. His daughter was 13. He had not seen his wife in 15 years. This would be the last chance. If he failed, there would be no other. On April 14, 1978, Klaus Hartmann boarded a train to East Berlin with forged travel documents, a tourist visa, and a small backpack containing a flashlight, a compass, and a photograph of a daughter he had never met. The train crossed the border at Friedrichstraße station. Guards checked his papers. They asked questions. Klaus answered calmly, his heart a hammer in his chest. They stamped his visa and waved him through. Klaus stepped onto the platform in East Berlin and breathed the air of his former prison. 17 years after his first escape, he had voluntarily returned. Now he just had to leave again, with his family, through a sewer. Beneath the most fortified border on Earth, the second escape had begun. Klaus walked through East Berlin like a ghost returning to a body it had abandoned. The streets were familiar but wrong. Buildings, he remembered, had been demolished. Others had aged badly, their facades crumbling, their windows dark. The city felt smaller than he remembered, more cramped, as if the wall had compressed everything within it. He did not go directly to his old apartment. That would have been foolish. The Stasi would be watching. They had files on every refugee who had escaped. They monitored families left behind, waiting for exactly this kind of reunion attempt. Instead, Klaus checked into a state-run hotel near Alexanderplatz. The room was small, clean, and depressing. A single window overlooked a parking lot. The wallpaper was brown. The smell was institutional, bleach and old cigarettes. He waited until evening, then he walked. Prenzlauer Berg was 3 kilometers away. Klaus took a roundabout route, doubling back twice to ensure he was not being followed. He had learned counter-surveillance techniques from Rolf. Simple things. Window reflections. Sudden stops. Reversed directions. He saw no obvious tails. But in East Berlin, the obvious ones were rarely the problem. The apartment building looked exactly as he remembered. 5 stories of gray concrete. A courtyard entrance. Narrow stairs that smelled of cooking and mildew. Klaus stood across the street in the shadow of a doorway, watching windows. 3rd floor, Second window from the left. That had been their apartment. A light was on. Anna was home. Klaus waited 2 hours, watching. No one entered or left the building. No cars sat idling with engines running. No men in long coats smoked cigarettes in doorways. Finally, at 22:30, he crossed the street. The building entrance was unlocked. The stairwell was dark. Klaus climbed slowly, his footsteps echoing. On the 3rd floor, he stopped in front of a door marked 3B. The same apartment. The same brass numbers screwed into old wood. He knocked. 3 soft taps. Silence. Then footsteps inside. A lock turning. The door opened a crack held by a security chain. A woman's face appeared in the gap. Older. Lines around her eyes. Hair shorter than he remembered. But still Anna. She stared at him. Her expression did not change. When she spoke, her voice was flat, controlled. "You should not be here." "I know," Klaus said. "They watch this building. I know." Anna's eyes moved past him, scanning the hallway. Then she unhooked the chain and opened the door wider. Inside, quickly. Klaus stepped through. Anna closed the door, locked it, and slid the chain back into place. Then she turned to face him. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. 15 years collapsed into silence. "You look older," Anna said finally. "So do you." She almost smiled. "Almost. Why are you here, Klaus?" "For you. For Lena." Anna's expression hardened. "You cannot take us with you. I can. I have a plan. You had a plan last time. You left me alone with Stasi officers at my door asking if I helped you. You left me pregnant and afraid and—" She stopped. Breathed. "You left. I did not know you were. Pregnant. Would it have mattered?" The question hung between them like a blade. Klaus had no answer that would satisfy. He had made his choice 15 years ago. He had chosen freedom over family. That truth was immutable. "I came back," he said quietly. "That has to mean something." Anna looked away. "Lena is asleep. You cannot see her. Not tonight. It is too dangerous." "When?" "Tomorrow. After school. There is a park near Schanhauser Allee. I will bring her. 16 o'clock hours. But Klaus," she met his eyes, "if this goes wrong, if we are caught, they will send you to prison and take Lena from me. Do you understand? She will grow up in a state orphanage, learning to hate her parents. We will not be caught. You cannot promise that." "No," Klaus admitted. "But I can promise I will try." Anna studied his face. Whatever she saw there must have been enough, because she nodded slowly. "Schönen hours. Schanhauser Allee Park. Do not be late." Klaus left the building the way he had come, carefully watching shadows, memorizing faces. No one followed him. Or if they did, they were better than he was at noticing. Back in his hotel room, Klaus lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. In 12 hours he would meet his daughter for the first time. In 8 days he would attempt to escape through a sewer with his family. 1 in 3. Maybe worse. But he had already beaten those odds once. The park was small and unremarkable. A few benches. A children's playground with rusted swings. Gravel paths lined with anemic trees. Klaus arrived at 15:45 and sat on a bench near the entrance, watching. At 15:58, Anna appeared. She was not alone. The girl walking beside her was 13 years old, thin and serious. She wore a school uniform, blue skirt, white shirt, red neckerchief of the young pioneers. Her hair was dark, pulled back in a practical ponytail. She had Klaus's eyes. Klaus stood slowly. His legs felt unsteady. Anna walked to the bench. Lena followed, curious and cautious. "Lena," Anna said quietly, "this is your father." The girl stared at him. Her expression was unreadable. Finally she spoke. "You are the one who left." Klaus nodded. But Klaus had no simple explanation for why a man would choose to risk death rather than live safely in a cage. "Because I wanted you to grow up in a place where you could ask why," he said finally. Lena considered this. "Mother says you live in the West." "I do. Is it better there?" "Different." "Yes. Better." "Better how?" "You can read books that are not approved. You can travel without permission. You can choose your own future." Lena frowned. "We can choose our future here." What do you want to be when you grow up?" "A doctor. Here, you will be assigned to a medical school if the party decides you are suitable. In the West, you can apply to any university. You can study what you want. You can succeed or fail based on your own ability, not on your political reliability." "That sounds lonely." Klaus almost laughed. She was not wrong. Freedom was lonely. It was terrifying. It required you to be responsible for your own life, without the state to tell you what to think or where to work. "It is," he admitted, "but it is yours." Lena looked at her mother. Anna said nothing. Then Lena looked back at Klaus. "Mother says you want to take us to the West." "I do. How?" "It is better if you do not know yet. But I promise you, if you come with me, if you trust me, I will get you out." "You cannot promise that." "No, but I can try." Lena nodded slowly. She was too young to understand the weight of this decision, but she was old enough to understand that staying in East Berlin meant living the rest of her life in a system that had already decided who she could be. "When?" she asked. 6 days. April 22nd. Your mother will explain." Lena looked at Anna again. Anna's face was pale, tired. She had lived 15 years in fear and uncertainty. Klaus was offering her a chance at freedom. But he was also offering another roll of the dice with death as the consequence. "All right," Lena said. "I will come." Klaus felt something break open in his chest. Relief. Terror. Hope. "Thank you," he whispered. They did not stay long. Meeting in public was dangerous. Klaus gave Anna final instructions: where to go, when, what to bring. A change of clothes. No documents. Nothing that would be missed immediately. As they left, Lena turned back once. She raised her hand in a small wave. Klaus waved back. Then she was gone, disappearing with Anna into the gray streets of East Berlin. Klaus sat on the bench for another 20 minutes, memorizing the moment. The first time he had seen his daughter. The first time she had seen him. Possibly the last time, if this went wrong. The next 6 days passed in slow agony. Klaus stayed in his hotel, venturing out only to confirm details of the escape route. He visited the sewer access point twice, memorizing landmarks. He timed guard rotations. He studied weather forecasts, hoping for rain that might muffle sound. Rolf had arranged everything. The access point was in a basement of an abandoned building near Köpenick. The tunnel beneath was part of an old storm drain system that predated the wall. It ran west for nearly a kilometer before emerging in the American sector. The East Germans knew about the tunnel. They had graded most of the entrances and installed sensors in others. But Rolf's network had discovered a passage that remained unmonitored, a maintenance shaft that connected to the main drain through a side channel too narrow for regular patrols. It would be tight, it would be dark, it would be filled with water and rats and the smell of sewage, but it would be unguarded. If they could reach the access point, if they could navigate the tunnel, if they could avoid patrols, if. On the evening of April 21st, Klaus made contact with Anna using a dead drop, a folded note left beneath a loose brick in a courtyard wall. The message was simple: tomorrow, midnight, Köpenick access. Come alone. Trust me. He did not know if she would come. He did not know if Lena would be with her. He did not know if Stasi officers were reading the note at that very moment, preparing an ambush. He knew only that he had done everything he could. The rest was chance. That night, Klaus did not sleep. He sat in his hotel room with the lights off, watching headlights move across the ceiling. He thought about his first escape, the sound of bullets, the feeling of falling on the western side, The years of guilt and waiting. This time would be different. This time, he was not running alone. At 23 o'clock on April 22, 1978, Klaus left the hotel for the last time. He walked through dark streets toward Köpenick. The city was quiet. Most people were home. Those who were not avoided eye contact. He reached the abandoned building at 2340. It was a 3-story factory that had been shut down years ago. Windows broken, doors chained. But Rolf had provided a key to a side entrance. Klaus let himself in. The interior was dark and hollow. Water dripped somewhere. Metal creaked in the wind. He descended stairs to the basement. The access shaft was in the northwest corner, hidden behind a pile of old machinery. Klaus moved the debris aside and found the iron cover, just as Rolf had described. He checked his watch. 23:52. 8 minutes. Klaus lifted the cover. Below was darkness and the smell of wet stone. A ladder descended into nothing. He waited. At 23:58 he heard footsteps above. Klaus tensed, hand moving to the iron pry bar in his belt. If it was Stasi, if he had been betrayed, but the footsteps were light. 2 sets, one heavier, one softer. Anna appeared at the top of the basement stairs. Lena was beside her, carrying a small backpack. Klaus exhaled. "You came. We came," Anna said. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. Lena stared at the open shaft. "We are going down there?" "Yes. How far?" 1 kilometer, maybe less. 20 minutes if we move quickly. And if we are caught? Klaus looked at his daughter. She deserved honesty. "Then we will be arrested. Your mother and I will go to prison. You will be sent to a state home." Lena nodded. "Better to know." Klaus felt a strange pride. His daughter was afraid, but she was not running from the fear. "We should go," Anna said, "before the patrols change." Klaus descended first, testing each rung of the ladder. At the bottom was a narrow tunnel, brick-lined and wet. His flashlight beam revealed water pooled on the floor, rusted pipes overhead, and the distant sound of flowing water. Anna came next. Then Lena. Klaus pulled the iron cover closed above them. They were sealed in darkness beneath the wall. "Stay close," Klaus said. "Watch your step. Do not speak unless necessary." He led them forward. The tunnel was barely tall enough to walk upright. Water soaked their shoes. The air was cold and thick with the smell of decay. They walked for 10 minutes in silence. The tunnel branched twice. Klaus consulted his compass, chose the correct path. The sound of water grew louder. Then ahead, Klaus saw it. A grate across the tunnel. Steel bars rusted but intact. He approached slowly. The grate was locked. But Rolf had prepared for this. Klaus pulled the pry bar from his belt and wedged it between the lock and the frame. He pulled. The metal groaned. The lock held. He pulled harder. His arms burned. The bar slipped. He reset it and pulled again. The lock snapped. The grate swung open. They continued. 5 minutes later, the tunnel began to slope upward. The water grew shallower. Klaus's flashlight revealed marks on the walls, old graffiti, dates, names of people who had passed through before. They were close, and then Klaus heard it, a sound behind them, distant but unmistakable. Voices, boots on wet stone. Flashlight beams cutting through darkness. Someone had followed them. Or someone had discovered the open access shaft. Either way, they were being pursued. "Run," Klaus said. They ran. Anna grabbed Lena's hand. Klaus led them forward, splashing through water, ducking under pipes. Moving toward the exit that had to be close, had to be. There. Ahead. Another ladder. Light filtering down from above, Klaus reached it first. He climbed, shoved the cover aside, pulled himself up into cold night air. He was in West Berlin. A narrow alley between buildings. Streetlights in the distance. The sound of traffic. He reached down. "Anna, now!" Anna climbed. Klaus pulled her up. Then Lena. The girl's hands were freezing. Behind them, in the tunnel, the voices grew louder. Klaus replaced the cover. They ran. They emerged onto a main street. Cars passed. People walked dogs. Normal life in a free city. Klaus stopped, turned, looked back. No one followed. The border was absolute. The East German soldiers could not cross. They had made it. Anna was crying. Lena was shaking. Klaus wrapped his arms around both of them. "We are safe," he said. "We are out." They stood in that embrace for a long time. A family reunited. A promise kept. Klaus had crossed the wall twice. Once for himself, once for them. And this time, he had won. The story of Klaus-Dieter Hartmann's double escape became legend in West Berlin. Journalists wrote articles. Photographers asked for pictures. Politicians used his story as propaganda, proof that people would risk everything to leave the communist East. Klaus declined most interviews. He was not interested in being a symbol. He was only interested in being a father. The family was granted asylum within days. They were given housing assistance, job placement services, and resettlement support. Anna found work as a seamstress again, this time in a private shop where she could choose her hours. Lena enrolled in school and adapted with the resilience of the young. Klaus returned to his job as a draftsman. He was quiet about his past. He did not speak about the wall unless asked. When people called him brave, he shook his head. "I was not brave," he would say. "I was necessary." The years passed. Lena grew up. She became a doctor, as she had wanted. She married. She had children of her own, Klaus's grandchildren, born in freedom. Anna and Klaus stayed together. They never spoke about the 15 years they had spent apart. Some wounds do not heal. They only become part of the landscape. In 1989, the wall fell. Klaus watched it on television with Lena beside him. People danced on concrete that had once meant death. Hammers broke barriers into souvenirs. "It seems impossible," Lena said. "It always was," Klaus replied. That was the point. The wall had never been about security. It had been about control. About convincing people that escape was impossible, and therefore resistance was futile. But walls only work if people believe in them. Klaus had stopped believing in 1961, and that disbelief had saved his family. Klaus-Dieter Hartmann died in 2003 at the age of 66. Heart failure, the doctors said. Old age, his family said. A life fully lived. At his funeral, Lena read from a letter he had written her years before. It was the only time Klaus had put his philosophy into words. "I was not a hero. I was afraid every moment, but I learned that walls are only as strong as your willingness to accept them. The moment you decide a boundary is illegitimate, the moment you choose freedom over safety, that wall has already fallen. Everything after that is just waiting for the world to catch up." The photographs. Mentioned in the beginning of this story, the ones hidden for decades, were found after Klaus's death. They were not dramatic. They were simple family photos. Anna and Klaus in West Berlin. Lena as a child. Birthdays and Christmases and ordinary moments. But one photograph stood out. It was taken in 1978, days after their escape. Klaus, Anna, and Lena standing together on a street corner in West Berlin. They are not smiling. They look exhausted, relieved, and uncertain. But they are together. And that photograph, more than any propaganda image or political speech, captured the truth of the Cold War. It was not about superpowers or ideology. It was about families separated by barbed wire. It was about people willing to risk death for the simple right to choose their own future. Klaus crossed the wall twice. The first time he saved himself. The second time he saved everything that mattered. And in the end, that was what freedom meant. Not the absence of walls, but the willingness to cross them. If stories like this make you reflect on how fragile freedom really was, how easily it can be taken, and how desperately it must be defended, consider subscribing to Cold War Stories. There are many more tales from behind the Iron Curtain that deserve to be told. Stories of ordinary people who faced impossible choices. Stories of courage measured not in victories but in survival. These are not stories of heroes. They are stories of humans, and they should never be forgotten. The Cold War ended in 1989, but its lessons remain. Walls still exist, some made of concrete, some made of laws, some made of fear. And as long as they exist, there will be people like Klaus Hartmann willing to risk everything to cross them. Not because they are brave, but because they are necessary. This was the story of the prisoner who escaped the Berlin Wall twice. One man, two escapes. One family saved from a system designed to make salvation impossible. The files have been opened. The truth has been told. And somewhere in Berlin, on a street corner in the former East, there is a small memorial plaque with Klaus's name and 3 simple words: he came back. That is legacy enough.